novices.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. And speaking of sharing, I am going to share my screen with you all. Maybe. Yes, here, we'll just do it this way. All right, can you all see my screen here? There we go.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, when we talk about Bloom's taxonomy, this is essentially what we're talking about. We're starting at the bottom, which is just very basic general knowledge skills with remembering, and we're working our way up through higher order thinking skills. So we're really focusing on, critical thinking and students thinking for themselves for that evaluating and creating. Oftentimes when we work with new faculty members here on the Create team, we talk about how teaching is really at the top of this list as well. So anytime that we ask our students to, hey, go and try and understand this concept and then come back and teach your classmates about it, there's a reason for that madness, right? And so that's right up there at the top with the creating and the evaluating. So everything that we talk about today, this is essentially what we're talking about. Lane, you did mention the different kinds of verbs that we use, and this is just a quick example of the different kinds of verbs that are available through this whole scheme. Okay, so again, starting with the remembering is down here on the left hand side, and it moves up through evaluating, creating, so on and so forth. What's really interesting here is that some of these actually are in multiple categories. For example, let's see now. So here's compare as an understanding level, and then here's compare at the analyzing level. Okay, so when we choose these, and when I would like you all to tell me, what are we choosing these for? These verbs, where are we putting them into? Where are we adding these?
We're adding them into our objectives for our student learning outcomes.
Love it. Yes, that's exactly right. These are we are attaching these to all of our objectives for what we want our students to be able to know and do when they are done with our lesson or with our course. And so picking these is very important. If we, which one we pick is very important. So for example, if we're in maybe a 100 level course, we might be focusing more on this, the understanding idea of comparing versus maybe a 300 or 200 level course where we are focusing on how are we analyzing, comparing and contrasting the differences between two different groups or ideas. Hi, welcome back. Okay, so here, let's have some questions then about those verbs, Bloom's taxonomy overall. Okay, how do you move students from the knowledge down and remembering level at the bottom all the way up through the comprehension and creating level? How do you see that in either your course or your program?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
In our PTA program, we do start at the 100 level, and the verbs that we use for our student learning outcomes at that level are more of the understanding and remembering those introductory courses. And then then I teach also in the 200 level program, say my neurology class, and that class has a lot more of the analyzing and applying verbs in it. So we see that progression across courses over time in the program. And of course, there are things that the students have to learn for the first time in our neuro class, right? Because they've never had neuro before, but we still have a higher expectation for their outcomes from that second year course, as opposed to the introductory courses.
Okay, I love that. Yeah. Who else?
This is Joy, and back in the medical lab pathology. We do something similar to what Lane was talking about. Our students all come in with a bachelor's degree, or this is their senior year of college. So they've had microbiology and chemistry and some of the other sciences we require as prerequisites. But we start off our first 8 weeks in the classroom here in our lab, and we give all the basic lectures, and we try to test them only at the level 1, which is 1 and 2 for us, basic knowledge. So our exams and quizzes are mainly just memorization things. You know, what's the normal range for a lipid profile, or you know, which white blood cell is this? Basic biochemical reactions, those types of things. As we start into our first clinical rotation, we start adding more application questions, because now they've heard it all once. We're in the lab, in the pathology lab, doing real laboratory testing, and we want them to be able to know more than just basic memorization. And then like this semester, we're more jumping to level 3, which would be 5 and 6 in Bloom's, getting them to the problem solving. It's the entire test is a problem solving, because that would be overwhelming, but we want them to be able to troubleshoot, problem solve, figure things out. There's no way, as I'm sure in all of your programs, for a student to know every possible scenario that could happen. So if they have a strong understanding of the basics, then we can manipulate the variables and see if they can still figure out the information.
I love that. So do you do, it might be different over where you're at. Do you utilize like simulations and role playing and those kinds of things?
Not a whole lot, because we're live in the lab helping run the laboratory tests for the hospital. But you know, we do put together, I think we talked about it in previous sessions, case studies and things. I mean, there's no way every student in a hematology rotation will see a sickle cell patient or someone with certain types of leukemia. So we have practice slides that we keep available to make sure they can identify all the unusual cells.
Like patients that have had infrequent.
Right, we can keep old samples or lab results and use it as a learning experience with our students. So they do get exposed to all of that, because they'll be tested over all of it, even if they didn't see it in a live patient the 4 weeks they were in microbiology. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Love that. And anybody else on how you move your students from that base remembering level knowledge up through the creating or analysis or application piece?
I tend to just in lab walk them through scenarios. We try to do some simulation if possible, if I can figure out how to simulate it. Otherwise like word problems, and try to break it down for them so that they can understand, like, this is what I'm trying to search for out of this question, so that they get more prepared for later on when questions look similar, and what do I need and how do I figure this out? What do I know as a basis of understanding from recall of other questions, and try to build that a little bit more. That's what my goal right now in lab this semester is to try to do that more often.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so when we think about Bloom's and the different moving from those different levels, do you write your own curriculum, or is that someone else and you just are utilizing their curriculum? And either way, how do you see your curriculum moving through those different ideas? From the beginning, we're just doing the remembering up through the mastery level of creating.
Okay, this is Julie again. I could jump in. I don't want to like dominate though, so feel free to interrupt. We created all of our own curriculum, and
Right.
as teachers retire or move into other positions and we hire new, they take over that curriculum and then make changes as things in laboratory medicine change. So we're always updating our curriculum. The way we use our objectives, and this is required by our national accrediting agency, we have to have written objectives for everything that we teach, and we have to make sure we're covering all 6 levels of objectives. We also, although they don't usually inspect quite to this detail anymore, but we have to make sure that if we're asking an exam question, because we have exams every week, that we have a matching objective so that we're not blindsiding the students. And they'll know if they look at their objectives, they're going to know what the information is that we're covering on that particular test. And the rule is you can have a high level objective with a higher level verb, and still ask, a lower level question, but you cannot have a low level verb that just says, define antibody and then ask them a problem solving question about it. So, we sometimes try to bridge our exams to make sure that we can match what's the topic with which objective goes with it in case a student said, I didn't think I needed to know this. We can tell them, yes, you've got a lecture objective right here that says you're responsible for this information. And because we're in clinicals with them all day, they're usually not blindsided. We usually are talking to them all day long while they're performing the laboratory work in our pathology department. And we're asking them questions all the time to help clue them in. If I'm talking to you about this, you might need to know this for the test on Friday. So that's kind of how we handle it here.
Thank you.
This is Kelsey, and I teach in the MSN program. So we obviously are using a little bit more of those higher level verbiage and everything. And we actually just redid our curriculum for fall 2024 start. So we used all of the blooms all of the time. And I think the biggest thing for us was obviously trying to use those higher level objectives just because we are in a master's program. But also we just kept repeating, and it really helped us with writing, course objectives and just weekly objectives or course outcomes and weekly objectives. By the end of this week, the student will be able to, and then also, by the end of this course, the student will be able to, because sometimes we just get caught up in they should be able to, sometimes you write your course outcomes like a weekly objective. So the biggest thing is just making sure you're stating by the end of the course, the student should be able to do this and not making it a weekly objective or almost a description for an assignment, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. That's that whole idea that we talked about from time to time of backwards design. At the end of the semester or quarter or course or whatever it is, the students will be able to do these things, and usually those are going to be more towards the top end. Again, it depends on the course; it's course dependent. But yes, absolutely, Kelsey, that's great. Okay, so when thinking about those higher levels, the analysis and the creation and the evaluation pieces, what are the opportunities that you provide your students to focus in on those areas? I don't know if they are the ones doing the teaching. Maybe they're creating some kind of a new care plan or doing some kind of innovative intervention of some sort. What do you all provide for your students to really kind of live in those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy?
Well, like Ashley already mentioned, we do a lot of like paper case studies. So we give them information about patients, and then they have to think about what they would need to know, what else they would need to know before they would be ready to treat the patient, that kind of thing. So that's a bit more of a, right, exploring and problem solving, and then we give them another layer of here's what has happened to the patient, right? And then they have to think through how they're going to treat those deficiencies and prioritize as well. So we try to make it, very clinically relevant, even when we don't have patients in front of them. And then we do give them opportunities. We either bring patients in or we go out to sites where they can treat patients to practice. And that's wonderful. They love that.
Well, I have nursing students, their senior year, I help them with their preceptorship, and I have them write journal articles or journal entries to reflect on their practice in preceptorship. But then I've also tasked them with finding some literature out there to support their thought process. And then each time that they're analyzing that information, and if it's a new journal article, then I have a course library where I put any new articles so that other students can then read a little bit. I call it read more about it for their next prompt that I have. So that's kind of how I have them meet their objectives. Since we really don't meet in class, it's more, this is what I saw in clinical. This is how it answers, Dr. K's question about patient safety, and this is where you can read more about it. So we're kind of at the end of their program.
Oh, sure. And so, I mean, especially if you're talking about that 400 level end of program, they should absolutely be at that level where that's really where they're living on a daily basis of that higher analysis and above, for sure. I love that, Kathy. Thank you.
This is Kelsey, kind of building off of what Lane said with evolving case studies. I actually too have students in the 3P course in the master's program. One of them is tasked as the leader for the week, and they actually have to create the case study themselves about a patient. And they apply a couple of readings as well as a couple of journal articles to help students answer those questions over the topic. And then they also have to respond to the peers who respond back to their case study that they provided. So it kind of puts them in that higher leadership role of actually, that create level, if you will, of creating an actual case study, and then also responding to their peers and providing the ratings. So that's kind of a fun assignment to kind of put them in charge of their own learning in a sense.
Oh yeah, that's great, Kelsey. Is that a rotational basis or is that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So we put students in groups. So depending on the number, that's in the course, there's one leader for the week, and then the rest are the peer responders. It spans over 3 weeks. So we try to put, 3 in a group. Sometimes the numbers don't work out. So you might have 2 being co-leaders for the week, but yeah, it's revolving. So then they switch roles. So you'll always be a peer responder twice and then a leader once.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Kelsey.
So I had a question to Lane and Kelsey. When you guys do your prompted case studies, so the ones that you give the students, do you give it to them one question at a time? Like you give them their patient description and they need to assess that and then you develop it as they go? Or do they get the full case study with all the questions kind of leading them to the answer?
I give them like a page at a time, so they'll have a description about the patient and they'll have some questions to consider. And then once we have a discussion about that, then we'll give them the next layer of where the patient is.
Yeah, because we utilize case studies too, but I think that at least what I'm noticing is they kind of rely pretty heavily on the next question or the next couple questions and then go back and base their answers off of that. So I wonder if doing it like how you were doing it, where you hide some of those next leading questions, it makes them think a little bit more independently.
Yeah.
We do ours a little bit differently just because we are in a 5-week online format. So it's a little bit more condensed where we don't necessarily have the opportunity to say, okay, here's this. Now another one's going to unfold just because of the format. We give them all of the information up front. And then I know something new we're kind of doing just because, again, ours course is a little bit different. I do have track specific questions for that case study from an educator perspective, informatics, care coordinator, and executive. That way it's based solely on what would be your role in this, case study. Even though it's a 3P course, it's good just to get the different perspectives of the different tracks. So we do give the whole case study up front.
All right. So then what about, so we talked about, trying to keep our students as much as we can in that analysis and higher area, but sometimes our students aren't quite ready for that level yet. So what do you all do to differentiate your teaching methods for those students who aren't ready to move up Bloom's hierarchy yet?
For me, I learned early on, I guess, that I needed to make sure that I was giving them enough structure and guidance because I tended to like jump, I think, because it was so because I had so much experience with it. I think I tended to ask them questions that were too hard too soon without the scaffolding. So that was a learning experience for me. Just realizing like, oh, I need to step back and take it a little bit at a time. What seemed almost like I thought, oh, I would be too simplistic if I did it that way, or I'd be boring people, but they really needed that scaffolding, I think is a great word for it.
The scaffolding is a beautiful word, yes. I mean, it was like, I forget where we were at the other day, but someone talking about, hey, if I am teaching people how to change a tire, but they don't even know what, a tire iron is or what a lug nut is, then they're not going to be able to really understand anything else that I say if they can't get past those. So yeah, Lane, you're absolutely right. Love it.
This is Kelsey, and I agree with Lane. I think students thrive on building on what they know. So week to week, if you can build on that knowledge, and I think providing them, clear assignment guidelines. I even do I do assignment overview videos so they know what the expectations are, what the objective of this assignment is, and what the purpose is, and how it's applicable to them. And also just talking about and putting in their, this is what we did last week. Now we're going to build on that and go the next step. So that way they can see, okay, I did this last week. It's time to move up into this next category and kind of build on what I already know, or that scaffolding effect that Lane talked about.
Yeah, and I'll use like study guides and questions, asking them questions that they have to answer before class. And I've really gotten better about thinking through, right? Like starting at the end of where I want them to be and thinking about what they need to know and the steps they need to take to get there, and then asking them questions that are more pertinent to that. Whereas I think when I first started, I just kind of went by the textbook and was like, oh yeah, they need to know all this. So being more selective about what underlying knowledge they need to be able to advance. was more helpful for me to think about it that way.
Lane, what was the process that you went through to discover that? I mean, like, I know.
Well, it was like probably being a bad teacher, right? Like the first year I taught, I was also getting a doctoral degree, and I
Oh
was
my
so
goodness.
excited about everything I was learning. I'm like, I have to tell them about this. So I just overwhelmed them with information so bad.
Well, so
So
what I'm
it's been a learning process for me just to, unfortunately, right? The students struggled because I gave them too much information. And so it was learning what to leave out.
Yeah, how did you learn that? How did you learn what to leave out? What was your process? How did you figure that out?
Again, it's like, so when I first started, there was a team-based learning seminar here.
Sure.
And so I learned about that, and I learned to ask myself, like, where do they need to be at the end? And then think about like going backwards of how can they get there. Was helpful to me in that learning process. But boy, I feel bad for the students I had the first year or two.
I feel you, Lane. I've done it on accident where you're like, I think they're ready. I think they can do this. And you have such high hopes. And then you recognize you're like, oh yeah, I didn't really teach them how to get from this point to this point. Right. And they do need to get walked through.
And it seems so obvious to us, so we can
there.
make that jump. But yeah,
yeah. And you gave them all the information to get there. It's just sometimes they need that like connection point and be told how to do it. And then in the future, they know how to do it. And they're like, oh, these are my expectations. I'm struggling with that right now a little bit.
Yeah, so I love that. I mean, sometimes with our students, the struggle is real because we are the experts and we are the ones who are like, come on, guys, we all know this. We've all talked about this. When in reality, it's like, okay, no, I just know that from my personal experiences, and I've got to connect those dots for you. So what are some like specific, does anybody have any specific activities to help those struggling students or anything that you do specifically maybe in class for your students who are struggling to get to those higher levels, or is it more one-on-one conversations? What's how do you work around those?
I feel like a lot of it is just one-on-one conversations. Sometimes you can manage students to the point that you can have them teach each other. I don't find that is as reliable. Sometimes it works and it can happen, and it can reduce the amount that you have to talk to as an instructor with them. But you can't say, hey, go talk to this student about connecting these, like that doesn't work. But oftentimes students can explain to each other and teach. Asking questions that's what you got to do. And that's what I found.
Yeah, Seth, I've found that sometimes the group tests work really well, where they have the scratch off forms and they really have good conversations, good problem solving conversations about why they think it's one answer versus another before they scratch it off to see if they're right. And that's been really fun to watch the students have those conversations. So sometimes that helps. And then I've also just had like group office hours where people can come and like sometimes they feel more comfortable coming in a group than individually, and sometimes they feel more comfortable coming individually. So yeah, I'll have like group office hours where I will say, okay, we'll go over these concepts that we've covered in class if you need more time, and and more discussion of those concepts come, and we'll discuss them. And I've had some success with that. Although every cohort is different. So some cohorts just elect a person to come talk to me, and then that person goes and educates the rest of the class. Am I really that scary?
I don't think it's scary. I think they just, there's an intimidation factor when you go to a teacher, you're like, oh, I made a mistake. And saying that can be hard sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I remember being scared to go, to go and talk to my professors in college because I didn't want them to think I was dumb. So I tell the students that. Tell them, you know, this is all a learning process, so it's okay to ask questions that you think are stupid because they're not stupid. They're going to help you learn.
There are no wrong questions, only inquisitive people.
Well, so you bring up a good point. You know, when we talk about, you know, helping people connect those dots and ask the right questions, sometimes the students don't even know what questions to ask, right? So, are there opportunities that, let me rephrase the question. What kind of opportunities do you provide your students for interdisciplinary type projects or collaborations with other students, whether it's in the college or outside of the college?
We used to have a like acute care simulation, and maybe that's still happening with some programs, and that was really fun. I enjoyed that. But I think most of our interdisciplinary collaboration now happens in the clinic
Sure.
when the students are out on their clinical rotations. What do y'all do?
I only have classes, so I give them, you know, group work, group reviews, things like that. That's how I get them talking and trying to get them to do things. It's really fun to ask them, like, use ChatGPT to go find a case study that you can give to another group and then have them both work on it and see who gets the right answer. And then compare to what ChatGPT says the answer is and are they right or wrong?
Right, because you have people from multiple disciplines in the same class, right? So that's nice.
I encourage the MSN students during our virtual orientation, create a Facebook group together, create a Teams group together, because a lot of times they like to share information. And I know specifically I've had students do that for like the statistics and research course, because that's one that typically more than not struggle with. So they've created Facebook groups and found that helpful just to kind of bounce ideas off of it, or just, you know, kind of what we talked about, maybe explain a concept that one's not understanding, but this other student is. And that way too, if it's the one group member that comes to email me a question, they can kind of take it back to the group then. So I really encourage them, because I know with online education, it's always that I feel like I'm on an island. I'm not connected with this student. So I urge them to create those online groups. That way they can bounce ideas off of each other.
Okay, so then let's talk about ethical awareness. What kind of opportunities do you provide for your students for analyzing ethical dilemmas? Is it more of the same with just case studies, or do you have specific activities that you do or work on with your students that are centered around, you know, that analysis or higher in Bloom's?
This is Julie in the lab. I think that's one area that I do believe we are lacking in our program. And I've often wondered about trying to have some kind of ethical case study. I don't always know how pertinent it is to, you know, the medical lab, but I know that years ago, somebody at the college was doing some really interesting ethical studies, and we just, of course, expect everyone to do their work, admit if they think they made a mistake or mixed up a patient sample, anything like that, and just be real upfront so we can fix it immediately and not cause harm to our patients. But I struggle with what would be an ethical dilemma for us. They're probably out there, and I can't think of it.
I've used ethical dilemmas from our professional journal. They'll have little like ethics corner
Sure.
patient examples. So I've used those in some of my classes, and I mean, there's one class where I teach them the basic ethical standards and such. So I use some case studies in that class, and then in my neuro class, I'll throw in like little vignettes about, what a PT might ask them to do, and what do they do if they don't know that treatment.
Yeah, sure.
How do they? And so I'll give them like some fun little options, and none of the options are perfect, so that we have more of a discussion. Like, I didn't want to just give them an answer that they thought, oh, this is obviously the perfect answer, right? So everything is a little bit skewed so that we have a discussion about what might be wrong with each, right or wrong with each of the options. And just make it kind of a fun, like hold up your answer and see what the different, like in small group discussion, and then hold up their answer, and that facilitates more discussion, especially if each group has a different answer. So I enjoy the discussion part that facilitates.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic.
My program with respiratory therapy, we have clinical discussion where I do try to bring up ethical dilemmas that I know of, just because I do find ethical situations occur more frequently in healthcare, where do you treat this patient? Maybe they're terminal, what do you do? And like, students aren't going to agree with what the physicians do sometimes. And just talking it through of, well, is it necessarily wrong, and trying to bring it up that way. We also have an issues and trends class that one of the assignments is to look at ethical issues and just discuss it of how you feel about it and what's the ethical issue within the situation. Like, found out the other year, Hurricane Katrina had a lot of ethical issues. There was a hospital that they did like mercy killings because they didn't think that they were going to get help in time. So they thought these patients were going to die a horrible death otherwise. And so it was an ethical issue of, did they do something wrong? So trying to build that kind of stuff in as well. That's not something we may experience, but to bring it on a global scale. So I love ethical cases. I want to incorporate them more. So if anyone else has ideas on how to incorporate, I love it.
Do you have any other ideas out there in the world?
So
I'd love
have
to.
Oh, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Seth. Okay. I have a discussion form that I have the students complete that just kind of different viewpoints, like where one might talk about like an ethical dilemma that they've encountered in the healthcare setting, or the students can identify like an inequity that they see in their current healthcare setting or previous healthcare setting, and kind of what the ethical considerations are for that inequity. So that's kind of where we touch on that in our courses.
I was going to say, I bet you we could poll a bunch of the people in professional organizations and see what ethical, like this ethics corner that Lane was talking about. I don't know if there's one in the anatomy group that I'm a part of, but I could easily see some of the nursing, the PTA, like all these other ones. I could see them having these ethical corners in their production. So having it maybe a whatever, creative conversation, lunch and learn, whatever, and having people bring those might be something worth considering. I don't know. That's just a crazy idea that I thought of as like that could bring a bunch of those and we could have a resource here for people that are interested in it. I don't know where it would live, but
That'd be really fun.
I think Lane just volunteered to run that creative conversation.
That's what I heard too. Yeah.
Well, Ashley loves loves ethical issues.
Lane, I'm not ready to take on more at the moment. Between the masters and doing and working, I'm maxed out.
Co-presenters.
Well, it would be fun to have, I don't know that it's really a lunch and learn, but just a group getting together and bringing their ethical scenarios or something. That'd be fun to just share. And that would give us all more ideas of scenarios that we hadn't thought about.
And this is Julie in the lab. We don't, of course, have direct patient care, so that might limit some of our thinking on ethical dilemmas. But I mean, we are part of healthcare, and I do think it'd be really interesting to hear maybe some of the situations those of you that are doing direct patient care run into, like you were mentioning, the inequities, things like that you might see that we're just running a lab test because the physician put the order in. The only thing, back in the old days when we would actually be out there taking blood from the patients, which we in the lab, except for phlebotomy, don't really do anymore. But I remember patients sometimes asking me, why are you running this test, or what test did the doctor order? Things like that. And we weren't allowed to tell them, oh, your doctor just ordered an HIV, or something like that. They're looking for leukemia. We would always have to say, oh, you'll have to discuss this with your nurse or physician. Sorry to dump back on everybody, but there were just certain things we were not allowed to tell the patient because we didn't know the whole story. We knew what the lab test meant, but we don't know what the patient's situation is. So that would have been some of our only things, that maybe we would have been careful of. And usually we call our results critical levels to the nurse or physician, and we're not directly talking to patients about their lab results.
So up to this point, we've had some great conversation, and I've really enjoyed what we've all had to say. Are there any questions that you have that I haven't asked, or that you have that you want to ask the group?
Going back to Bloom's, I would love to be able to connect my objectives in my test questions, right, to the objectives for the course. And I mean, I usually just write a little code at the end of the question, but I know in other learning management systems, there was a way to like map objectives to map test questions to objectives, and that would be something I would be interested in learning more about if we can do that with our current learning management system.
So specifically in Brightspace, being able to map your objectives to test questions?
Yeah, which that's just something in the back of my head. or to the levels of learning, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
That the test questions are asking.
I know one thing that we're piloting in MSN, just because we're changing our curriculum again to more competency based for the new AACN Essentials. We have started through Brightspace tying sub-competencies to our grading rubrics. That way we can map that back to show that assignment, if the student is either mastering that sub-competency, progressing, or has not mastered. That way we can just, keep track it, and so it's similar, Lane, just maybe a little bit different though. But I know Will worked on that for us, and we've started uploading that into our courses. That way we can start showing where we're assessing those sub-competencies and what sub-competency it's then tied back to.
Yeah, that sounds like it might be related to what I'm thinking about. Thanks, Kelsey. I'll talk to Will.
This is Julie. I have a question for the group. Do your accrediting agencies require you to teach educational methodology, as in test question analysis, writing objectives, those types of things? Because we are required to teach that. And so we kind of fake our way through it with some online things that we found from other people, but we're not really experts in it. But I just wondered if that was something your accrediting agencies require in your educational programs. Because we might have to talk to Spencer about helping us with some of this.
Yeah, that's great.
We don't have to teach our PTA students that, but I became a test writer for our board exam, so I learned all of that stuff for that, and that's been helpful. Writing questions for our students.
So with all the extra time you all have, make sure you guys get in and write test questions for everybody too, right? Because that's
the boards.
yeah, no, but generally speaking, yeah, I think that there's usually some kind of accountability in pretty much every accrediting body to show that there has been some kind of thought put into the objectives, and how do we get the students to understand those objectives, and then how do we get them to pass whatever test that they need to pass, and that kind of thing. I definitely know for the like the college-wide HLC that we're getting ready to do here, that is definitely tied to educational background and purposes, and everything's got to have an objective or a standard or something that we're meeting. So I can't speak for each individual program, but that would be my assumption. Ashley, have you seen that that you they have specific ways that they want you to teach your students, essentially?
Not like there's chapters that like they look at our main book, and that's about it, where it's just like, well, you have to teach this stuff out of the book. So you have certain things that we have to teach, but nothing like it sounds like that, like that.
Okay.
Right. Our accrediting agency gives us, outcomes that we need to achieve.
Okay, sure.
But they don't dictate how we teach to get there. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Kathy, what do you see? Seth?
Well,
I don't deal with
I'm a little
accreditation.
bit strange in that I don't give any tests during my preceptorship.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So, but I know that as a team, we do work on that in other courses.
I don't do a lot with accreditation, so
Yeah.
I have students write papers while they're in their clinical. Like right now, the students in their third clinical rotation have to write a paper where they look at a patient problem and they find a treatment to address that problem, and they have to find a couple of journal articles on that treatment and then describe like how they would use the treatment with a patient in their clinical. So that's application, right, of treatment,
Oh.
sort of.
I think so. Definitely analysis.
Yeah.
Julie, did we kind of answer your question or?
Yes, you did. That was helpful. And I know, you know, we have different accrediting agencies that require different things. And
Sure.
as some of your people were saying, we know what we need to teach. They don't always tell us exactly how to go about it. And some of our professional organizations list what they consider entry-level competency for a new graduate. So we try to make sure our students are, if we're gonna graduate them, we want them to be at that level. And we also, of course, want them to pass their national boards. And then
Right.
we become more outcomes-based also the past several years. Which is why they don't look so closely at our exams and our objectives anymore. As long as our
Mhm.
students are graduating and passing their boards, they're going to assume that we're teaching the correct information. So I appreciate everybody sharing.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all of your sharing as well. We are going to have this exact same conversation on Friday, so you do not need to join that unless you really want to. Maybe I'll surprise everyone and just give them a surprise ethical dilemma to discuss, and we'll see what happens. And so if you're really into that, then maybe you want to show up on Friday. Otherwise, it was great hearing from all of you, and thank you very much for all of your time. And we will see you next time.
Is your
Bye,
ethical
everyone.
dilemma going to be you soliciting ethical situations from your faculty,
It might
trying to
be.
break HIPAA?
It might. No, I would never do that. That's crazy. All right. See you guys. Have a great rest of your day.